Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another of my takes on China, but this time not really China, the Middle East, with a slight China focus. In one of the world's poorest countries, Yemen, there is a tribe called the Houthis. Emanating from that tribe to lead a larger coalition of other tribes is a group which does not want to be ruled by a Western or Saudi-backed puppet government. They are called Ansar Allah, which means supporters of God. Western media, in an effort to either simplify or perhaps denigrate or perhaps intimidate us, have given Ansar Allah different names. They're now referred to as either Houthis or Iranian-backed Houthis or sometimes Iranian-backed militia. They are rarely, if ever, referred to by their correct name. Most people don't know it. There's a good reason for this. We are being spoon-fed a line that this is all Iran's doing, and it's led us along a path of escalation which might even include a war with Iran. Some might refer to Ansar Allah as freedom fighters, others might call them terrorists, but not the USA. They were officially removed from the list of terrorists in February 2021. And one thing that could be agreed upon is that they do fight to remove the current government. But their fight might very well be considered by many a valid one. Even Chatham House described deep corruption in 2013, but the page has now been removed. Yemen was ranked 176 out of 180 in the Global Corruption Perception Index in 2022, and yet this corrupt government has the backing of the largest economy in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and the world's largest and most aggressive economy, the USA. Which might explain why the inconvenient truth has now been removed from Chatham House's website. But it does, in fact, in my opinion, justify Ansar Allah's cause. In March of last year, the UN declared the civil war in Yemen to be the world's worst humanitarian crisis, and so it was. However, it was eased when the two nations that supported either side of the war, Iran and Saudi Arabia, were brought to the table by China, and they resolved their differences. The inappropriately named United States Institute for Peace was critical of the move, stating Iran and Saudi Arabia had chosen to give China a considerable diplomatic victory, notwithstanding that both those countries had been suffering huge financial costs. In the case of Iran, the devaluation of the rial caused immense strain, but the cost to Saudi Arabia was different. They were supplying mostly US and British-made arms, and military support, of course, to the proven corrupt government of Yemen in Aden. What US IP neglected to mention was that $54.6 billion in US military aid had been supplied and was contributing to this ongoing civil war. Since the deal, there's been an ongoing economic improvement in the region with forecasts to improve further in 2024. But that forecast was before October the 7th and before the Israeli onslaught on Gaza, so things are very likely to change now. Iran and Saudi Arabia getting along was good for regional trade. It was very good for regional stability, but it led to a loss of revenue for the military-industrial complex. In most industries, where there's a loss of income in one sector, the industry diversifies into another, or the industry recedes. The MIC, military-industrial complex, however, is not like most industries. It thrives on wars, and when there's no war, it can't survive. So when $54.6 billion in sales to Saudi Arabia was no longer needed to fund a war in the world's poorest country, they seemingly needed to find another one, and find one they did. Not only has the Israeli attack on Gaza been good for business, Joe Biden announced this week that the US and UK, working with a coalition of 4 other nations, Australia, Bahrain, Canada, and the Netherlands, had attacked Yemen. Although Biden didn't use the word attack, what his coalition did was conduct strikes, presumably to soften what might very well be regarded as a war crime and make it sound so much nicer in the international community. A war crime. Biden took responsibility by opening his own press release with the words, "at my direction." and he used a UN Security Council resolution as justification for his actions. The resolution, however, gave him no such authority. The resolution called for respect of navigational rights. It allowed for the defense of ships. It specifically called for the Yemen Coast Guard to protect the sovereignty of the country of Yemen, and it asked that a further escalation be avoided. Now, before discussing further escalation, it's important to provide just some perspective on what's really happened there. Ansar Allah have fired missiles at 27 ships over the last few months. Not one of those ships has been disabled, none have been sunk, and not one sailor aboard them has been injured. Almost all shipping companies have announced that they will change routes, and this means there are a decreasing number of targets for the missiles. All military tacticians around the world know that the best conflict is the one that they avoid, or at least they should. Rerouting ships from the Red Sea around Africa might be a little more expensive, but not one life would be lost, and any expense incurred would easily be offset by the costs of the actual response, which so far has been military strikes on over 70 targets, in a country that has no air force, no air defenses to speak of. And this was only on the first day. On day 2 of this escalation, the US unilaterally hit another target that they described as a radar facility used by the Houthis. The most interesting point of this was the very last line of a CNN article. Unironically, they stated, quote, "The new strikes came after the White House said it was trying to avoid an escalation," unquote. In an effort to prevent escalation of a crisis, the US and its partners appear to have decided that escalation by them is the best way to avoid further escalation by others. It wasn't just the 70 targets in 28 sites, or rebel-controlled sites as they call them in Yemen, that were destroyed. This escalation to avoid an escalation also destroyed the recently gained prospects of peace, stability, and economic improvements in the area. If that wasn't bad enough, it looks like the world is now one step closer to an even wider escalation. All this is bad for the region, it's bad for the economy, and it's bad for the world. But it's good for one small group of people, the investors. Investors in Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and others saw their shares close higher on the day of the strikes. The people of Yemen, on the other hand, saw close up what the US Air Force and the Royal Air Force look like when they go to war. At least 5 people are dead and 6 more injured. There will no doubt be many, many more. Thanks once again for watching my take on China, and hopefully the next video will be back in China and hopefully also with better news from the Middle East. See you then.